Hey guys, I'm going to do some explanation of exercise 15. We did go over this on Tuesday, but I'm going to do a video so y'all can reference this as you start to do your homework if you haven't finished it already, because I'm still getting questions for it. So I figured this will be a way that you can just come back and look as needed. Okay, so I'm going to be doing exercises 4, 10, and 16 in 15A. Again, I think it's a good idea to always keep this set of rules in front of you as you're working. It'll make it easier because, as I said before, if you can think of these as puzzle pieces, you're looking for the proper puzzle piece in order to do the rule, to justify these proofs here. So I'm going to keep this in front of me, and I'm going to go back and forth between this and the exercise. So this is exercise 4. And what I have here are, for this one, they have already given us every single puzzle piece, and we're going to have to figure out which rules were used for lines 4, 5, and 6. So they already gave us this information here. So what we're going to look here is our conclusion has to be a negated H. So remember, oh my gosh, I erased way too much of that. Okay, so if you remember, we separate the conclusion because we need to keep this in our minds. This is our end goal. However, it can't be a puzzle piece used. So we move it over to the side. So the puzzle pieces we can use to begin with are 1 through 3. These are our puzzle pieces. Now for 4, they've already given it to us, and it's if H, then G. So this, if you can keep in mind, will be our conclusion for whatever rule of inference that we're using. So it's a conditional. There's the horseshoe. If H, then G. I'm going to come over here to my chart, and I'm going to look for the puzzle piece that has a conclusion that is a conditional. And I'm going to look at each one and find where they could be. So here's a conditional as the conclusion. I'm going to look at all the others. Here's another one, but this one has an antecedent and then a conditional as its consequent. And looking at the rest of them. And so the one that we're going for is the hypothetical syllogism because it has our conditional. Now, if you look at the hypothetical syllogism, P, if P, then Q, if Q, then R, therefore, if P, then R. And if you notice about this, there's 3 conditionals here. And the antecedent of the first premise is the antecedent of the conclusion. And the consequent of the second premise is the consequent of the conclusion. So looking back at what we have here, we know our conclusion because it tells us if H, then G. So in a hypothetical syllogism, I know that in the conclusion, the antecedent has to be the antecedent of the first premise. So I'm going to look at my puzzle pieces here and see which one has an H with a conditional, and the H is the antecedent. And I have 2 conditionals here as my option, but only one has the H as the antecedent. So I know that the first premise will have to be 2. So I'm going to put a number 2 here because that's my first premise puzzle piece. Now I know that the G has to be the consequent of the second premise, and it has to be a conditional. So I'm going to look back up here and find the puzzle piece that has a conditional, which is this horseshoe, and a G as the consequent, and it's number 1. So I'm going to put a number 1 here. And as we said before, this is the rule of hypothetical syllogism, so I'm going to label it HS. Now we have 4 puzzle pieces instead of 3, because now we can use this puzzle piece we just made as a premise, even though we just had it as a conclusion. So we're going to move on down here to number 5, and again, they already gave us this. If H, then H and G. And we just found the conclusion that had a conditional that looks like that with a variable and then another conjunction here as the conclusion. So we know the rule is going to be absorption, and let's look at the rule. If P, then Q, therefore P, if P, then P and Q. So all it did was take the antecedent, move it over to be with the consequent as a conjunction there. Okay, and that's what this looks like here. So which one looks like that? We can look at all these pieces. We need an H as the P, and then a G as the Q to represent us here. And as you can see, it's number 4, because there's our antecedent of H and our consequent of G absorbed into a conjunction here as the Q. Remember, as the P and Q there. Oh, where'd it go? Okay, there we go. So I'm going to put number 4 because that's the one that we used, and its absorption was the rule. So I'm writing that there. Okay, so now we have a negative or a negated H. But if you look at all of these, the ones that have H in them are antecedents. And if you remember our rules, you cannot, for validity, you cannot deny the antecedent outright. You first have to deny the consequent. So if we need to get a negated P or a negated antecedent, then we also need to have the Q place or the consequent negated first. So we need to look up here and find if there's a negated anything, and ding, there it is, number 3. So we know that we have a negative piece here, and does it match our consequent anywhere? Yes, it does. It matches the consequent here. So we know that we can use which rule. So we're going to look at our rules, and remember this is our conclusion, so we're going to look for a puzzle piece in the conclusion, and that's a negated P value. So there's a negated P, and that's a positive P or just a regular P, but that's not what we're looking for. So we know it's a modus tollens here. So as you can see, like what I was saying before, we have if P then Q, not Q. We denied the consequent, not the antecedent. So we deny the consequent, not P, therefore not Q, therefore not P. So we're going to plug in the puzzle pieces over here and see that we're going to use number 5 first. That is going to be our first premise. If H, then H and G. Now we're going to, remember this becomes our, kind of like our Q in the puzzle piece. When you have parentheses, you can kind of put those pieces together. So if I can write this, think of that as your P and this whole thing as your Q here. So if H, then H and G, not H and G. So I'm going to write number 3 there. Therefore, not H. So this was modus tollens. Okay, so that is number 4. And I'm going to write this over here. I did this on Tuesday. I'll do it again so you can visually see this a little bit better. So I'm going to write this one over here. 5 and 3 modus tollens. So if I write if H, then H and G, not H and G, therefore not H. So I'm going to put above these, so here you see there's 5, first premise, 3, second premise, conclusion, and there that was our final piece too. So if you can think of the modus tollens rule as it gives you these variables here, I'm going to input them here so you can visually see this better. H is our P. Oh, you can't see that. H and G is our Q. Not Q, therefore not P, if you can see that, and make that connection there, right there. Okay. All right. Now we can do number 10. Now number 10 is not given to us. So we have to figure out what puzzle piece we're gonna be using to prove that this conclusion can come from these premises up here. So we have if H then I, and if J then K. H, therefore I or Q. Now, just looking at that, you're like, what in the world? Like, how do you get to that? So first things first, you need to be able to visualize and catch things like this. This is why we're going to be really practicing visually catching the rules of inference. Visually, you have conditional, parentheses, like boom, and conditional, parentheses, boom. Visually, 2 sets of parentheses with a dot in the middle, constructive dilemma. Like your eye needs to visually catch that. See here? Constructive dilemma with those right there.